HOA Karen still destroyed my fence, so I put in an unexpected surprise that blew up her car. I never thought I'd be the type of person who has to go to war with his HOA. But here we are. This whole fiasco started about 2 years ago when my wife and I finally had enough money to purchase our first house. After months of searching, we found a great house in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and neatly maintained homes. Sure, it did have an HOA, but the fees were manageable and the complex was lovely. What could go wrong? The first red flag presented itself in our closing session. The previous owner leaned forward and whispered, "Beware of the HOA president. She's fanatical." He chuckled nervously, and I waved it off as par for the course. I should have been more careful. We moved in on a Saturday, and by Monday morning, there was an official HOA letter in our mailbox complaining about the moving truck parked in our driveway all weekend. It seems commercial vehicles were only allowed 9 to 5 on weekdays, and we broke this sacred rule. The letter was signed by the HOA president, who lived 3 houses away from us. My wife wanted to formally introduce ourselves, so we made cookies and went over the HOA. President opened the door before we even knocked. She was in her early 50s with a short blonde bob and a face like she just smelled something rotten. "You must be the new neighbors," she said, eyeing us up and down. "I'm the HOA president. Nice to meet you," I said, extending the cookies. "We got your letter and wanted to apologize for the truck. We didn't know the rules yet." She took the cookies with a stiff smile. "Yes, well, rules are rules. You're going to have to read the HOA bylaws closely. I've had to send out 5 violation notices this week alone," she said with some pride. "We'll surely read everything." "Cover to cover," my wife assured the HOA president. Nodded. "See that you do. Incidentally, you'll need to replace that hedge by your driveway. It's not on the list of approved plants." And so our orientation to life during her reign, the hedge in issue, was a beautiful line of boxwoods which clearly had existed for decades. They were well cared for, well trimmed, and quite frankly, one of the things that we loved about the house. But it appears that the HOA president informed us they were not on the approved vegetation list and need to come out within 30 days. I spent one evening going through the giant binder of HOA rules and discovered the vegetation guidelines. Boxwoods were not even on the list of approved, but there was a grandfather clause for what was already in the ground before 2010. Our hedge qualified. I typed up a polite response citing this clause and left it in the HOA president's mailbox 2 days. I returned from work to find tire tracks through some of my hedge. 3 of the bushes were flattened with clear signs that a car had rolled over them. Initially thought it was just a careless driver who had turned the corner too sharply. I was annoyed, but figured I'd just replant the damaged plants. The next day I was working at home and just happened to look out the window about lunchtime. I saw in horror the HOA president's white Lexus SUV drive deliberately off the road as she turned onto our street, driving right over my damaged hedge again. This was not an accident. She was doing it on purpose, trashing my property. I ran outside, but she was already parked in her driveway and disappeared in her house. I was furious, but decided to record the damage first. I photographed the smashed plants, the tire tracks, and the blatant proof of destruction. That night I went to speak to her myself. I rang her door, photos in hand, ready for a polite but firm discussion. She opened the door with that very same pinched expression. "Yes, I saw you drive on my hedge today," I said, forgetting small talk. "I have photographs. It's been damaged twice." She, folding her arms, "I don't know what you're talking about. Perhaps your non-compliant hedge is simply falling apart because it's not suitable for our neighborhood." "Look, it's not non-compliant, and we both know you've done this." I probed, holding up the photographs of her distinctive white SUV. She barely glanced at them. "Those could be anybody's car out of the way if your hedge had been placed properly in the rear behind the road as per HOA regulations. This would have never been an issue. The hedge is just where it should be." I argued it's been there for 20 years. "Well," she said with a smile, "if you had merely replaced it with the plants approved as instructed, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Good evening," and closed the door in my face. I was shocked this woman was methodically destroying my property to cause me to take down the hedge that she actually did not have the authority to order me to remove, was petty, spiteful, and completely barmy. The following day, I formally complained to the HOA board. That came to nothing. Because miracle, miracle, the president used the board to rule with an iron fist. I then installed a tiny security camera aimed at the hedge. In the hopes the prospect of being recorded would deter her, it did not. Over the next 2 weeks, she drove over my hedge 4 more times, turning onto our street. Each time I reported it with photo and video, and each time she denied it had done nothing wrong. I replanted the scorched plants twice. Before it dawned on me, this was turning into a costly game of chicken. She was determined to kill my hedge until I snapped and replaced the whole lot with whatever dreary shrubs were on her approved list. Following the 6th time I'd had enough, it was time to fight back. But I needed to be clever about it. Direct confrontation wasn't getting results, and I didn't want to stoop to her level of childishness. I needed something that would deter her from trespassing on my property and teach her a lesson. Without me breaking any rules, I phoned my friend Mike, who works in building, and told him the story. He laughed so hard, had to hold the phone away from my ear. Dude, he said to me when finally ceased laughing, I've got the best solution, and it's not against the law at all. The following Saturday, Mike arrived with truck and equipment. We spent the day cutting away the crooked section of the hedge, around 8 feet of bushes, where continued running them over. Instead, we dug a trench and filled it with concrete footing. When hardened, we built what looked like a planter box ornament with railway ties. It was soil-filled, and some of the leftover hedge sections were planted into it. From the sidewalk, it looked like we had only replaced the demolished hedge with a crude-appearing planter full of the same type of bushes. But beneath that apparent naivety was a thick concrete barrier that would survive a car crash. This will get the job done, Mike asserted, giving us approval for our work. The planter's edge is recessed 6 inches from where the original hedge used to be, so she can't complain. You've encroached on anything, and if she hits it well, her car's going to have a bad day. I finished feeling a combination of expectation and guilt. I didn't actually want to ruin her car, but I was fed up with having to replace my hedge every other week. We didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, I was again working from home when I sounded a loud boom followed by a car horn sound. I ran over to the window to catch sight of the HOA president's white Lexus, with the front end crumpled up against my reinforced planter, the airbag having deployed, and her sitting in the driver's seat looking bewildered. I phoned cop and ran out to see if she was all right. Despite everything, I did not want to see her get hurt. Are you okay? I asked, reaching the car. She was pressing her hand on her forehead where a red mark was being made from contact with the airbag. You did this on purpose, she shrieked the moment she saw me. You set a trap. I'm going to sue you for all you are worth by this time. Neighbors were coming out of their houses to see what had happened. One of them was a retired policeman who lived next door to me. He walked over to help what occurred here. He asked before I could respond to his question. The HOA president started telling her story of what had happened. He built an unauthorized structure that vandalized my car. He has been bugging me for weeks. I exhaled and pulled out my phone. Actually, I have video evidence of her continuously driving over my hedge over the past month after the 6th incident. I replaced it with a more durable planter that's fully on my property lines and adheres to all HOA regulations. I have the blueprints and permits if you'd like to see them. This wasn't entirely accurate. I didn't have a permit for the planter because our HOA and city didn't require one for structures under a certain size. But she didn't know that my neighbor raised an eyebrow. You've been purposely driving over his hedge. The HOA president's face turned red. That's ridiculous. I've never done something like that. I'd be happy to show the police the video when they arrive, I said, smiling sweetly like on cue. We could hear sirens in the distance. The HOA president's attitude suddenly appeared less confident. The police arrived, soon accompanied by an ambulance. The paramedics transported her in for a checkup. While I talked to the officers, I showed them the video recording off my security camera, recording the different times she had driven over my hedge. I explained also how I had complained to the HOA board and tried to resolve the issue peacefully. The officers took statements from both of us and some of the neighbors who had witnessed her behaving over the past weeks. While the officers were sympathetic to my situation, they told me that this was largely a civil matter, although they did mention in their report that the HOA president had been driving recklessly as the tow truck arrived to drive her totaled Lexus off. One of the officers approached me. Nice pot, he said with a grin. Barely concealed, legally sound. By the way, you have every right to protect your property as long as it's within your property line. The president of the HOA was apoplectic as she climbed into the ambulance for a precautionary checkup at the hospital. She wagged her finger at me and yelled, "This isn't over." But in most respects, it was news travels fast in small neighborhoods, and by evening everyone had heard of the HOA president's continued attempts to destroy my hedge, and how it had spectacularly backfired on her several neighbors who had also been bullied similarly by her got in touch with me to tell me about their own experiences and thank me for having stood up to her. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from her lawyer requiring me to pay for the damage to her car and her medical expenses. The letter informed me that I had maliciously built a harmful and intangible barrier. With the hope of doing some damage, I sent the letter to my homeowner's insurance company, who in turn assigned an attorney to my case. He went over my paperwork and security tapes and sent a message that amounted to telling her attorney to pound sand. He noted that I had enough evidence of her rampant vandalism of my property, that the planter was a legitimate structure that was constructed well within my property line, and that he could suggest pressing the matter would most definitely result in a lawsuit against me for the damage she had caused to my hedge. We did not get a call back from her lawyer after that. What we did hear, some 10 days later, was even better. The HOA board held an emergency meeting to address recent events I attended, as did nearly every other resident of the complex. The tension in the room was palpable as the board's vice president addressed us to explain that they were voting on whether to remove the president from her seat due to actions UMBE coming of a board member. The HOA president sat stiffly in her chair at the front of the room, a small bandage still intact on her forehead. When called upon to speak, she claimed she was the victim of a spiteful new homeowner who would not respect HOA rules, meaning me naturally. Then one by another, neighbors got up to recount their histories to her. Tales of petty offenses, selective enforcement of the rules, and personal grudges poured out. It seemed like everybody had a tale about the way she had destroyed their lives over paint colors, mailbox, heights, or what flowers they were allowed to plant. The vote was no contest. She was removed from the board, effective immediately, with the vice president serving as interim president until a proper election could be held. As individuals, people were leaving the meeting. An older gentleman who had been on the first HOA board years ago approached me. "That hedge of yours," he said with a twinkle in his eye. It was my idea at the time. "Looks good with that new planter section." I smiled. "Thank you, it's staying right where it is." He nodded, as it should. "You know, we're going to need some fresh blood onto the board after all this. Someone who has respect for the original idea of the community but not drunk on power. You could consider running." I quit, left me. "I'm the guy who just built a block wall barrier to take out the president's car." "Exactly." He said, "You're clever and you justify that," which is right, consider it. And astonishingly enough, I did take it into account. In fact, 3 months later, found myself were elected to the HOA board with some other homeowners who also wanted to change things for the better. We got to work immediately updating some of the more ridiculous rules and implementing a more transparent system of dealing with complaints. As for the last HOA president, she put her home on the market soon after being removed from the board. I heard she moved to a condo downtown with no HOA at all. It seems she'd had enough of community living. My hedge and planter are still thriving, and they've become a local landmark at times. I'll catch people slowing down as they pass by, perhaps wondering if the gossip is true about what lies beneath those harmless-looking bushes. And yes, I did finally acquire a proper permit for the planter, just in case the new HOA board approved it unanimously in the end. I figured that sometimes you have to stand your ground, even though it does involve the installation of a physical barrier to make it work. But more to the point, I discovered one man can literally make a positive difference to his community, be that either through saving much revered hedging or through helping to produce a more pragmatic HOA. And for all curious types, my wife thinks the entire exercise was ridiculous. But it was her who suggested we install analogous planters round the balance of the grounds. In case, she said, laughing, "Love that woman." Update: after 1 year, it's only been barely a year since the planter fiasco that sent our neighborhood into chaos. And I figured you'd all want to know an update on what's happened since then. First off, remember how the ex-HOA president put her house up for sale? Well, it sat there for months without a peep. Turns out she had managed to make so many enemies in the neighborhood that rumor got around to potential buyers. Real estate agents are required to disclose some things, And while the seller was voted out of office as HOA president, because of harassment isn't technically on that list, our neighborhood grapevine went into overtime. She ultimately sold the property for way below asking price. And I heard through the neighborhood gossip mill that she attempted to blame her financial loss on me. She even made an attempt at reviving her legal threats against me, sending another letter demanding payback for her car repairs, medical expenses, and now the loss on selling my home. My insurance company's lawyer did not simply send a dismissal. This time he went on the offensive, sending her a formal letter notifying her that any more harassment would result in a restraining order and a countersuit for the documented damage to my property. He included copies of all the security tapes, police reports, and witness statements we had compiled. We never heard from her again after that. Last, I know she moved to another state, completely good riddance. So far as me, I did end up being on the HOA board, and it's been an eye-opening experience. At least our first order of business was a complete rewriting of the HOA regulations. We threw away the ridiculous 200-page binder of picky rules and replaced it with a simple 20-page tome focused on protecting property values without micromanaging people's lives. The approved list of vegetation that started all this whole mess gone. Instead, we now have plain rules: keep your garden tidy, don't have weeds take over it, and don't put in invasive plants that would spill over onto other properties. That is all. Our second project was getting the HOA finances in order. Turns out the last president had been spending HOA money on some shady things. She had contracted her brother-in-law's landscaping company at double the going rate and authorized unnecessary remodels to the property is nearest to her home, regardless of needs elsewhere in the community. I don't think anyone noticed this until I spoke up at an emergency board meeting after our review of the extent of financial mismanagement. "Oh yes, people did notice," explained Martha. A board member for decades herself who had been seated with me, but threatened with notice of violation and penalties. Anyone who would dare to challenge her. Most people determined it wasn't worth the battle with the financial issues exposed. We submitted an insurance claim against the HOA fidelity bond, which is basically insurance that covers theft or use of funds by board members. The insurance company conducted their own investigation and wound up paying out nearly $30,000 to the HOA, money that should have been in our reserves, but had been siphoned away over the years. They also brought their own case against the former president to recover those funds. I don't know all the facts, but I do know she ended up settling, rather than pursuing a civil trial where all her misdeeds would become public record. The money retrieved allowed us to address some long-neglected maintenance issues in the community without raising HOA fees. We fixed the crumble retaining wall behind the community playground, resurfaced the worst sections of sidewalk, and replaced the antiquated irrigation system in the common areas to reduce water waste. These improvements created an immediate impact on the neighborhood's appearance, and residents who were antagonistic towards the HOA started engaging constructively on our quarterly meetings. Instead of angry complaints, we started receiving thank you letters and good suggestions. My notorious planter has grown into a kind of neighborhood. Legend newcomers are told the story within days of moving in normally with lots of imbel. In some versions, the former president's car flipped 3 times after running into it, or the planter contained steel rebar spikes. It did not. That would have been illegal and dangerous. About 6 months after the dreadful planter incident, I installed a small decorative fence around my entire set of planter boxes, partly to keep the plants from our new puppy, and partly to make absolutely certain no one could complain that they were a hazard. The fence is entirely compliant with our new simplified HOA regulations. Of course, my next-door neighbor, Tom, the retired policeman who witnessed the whole planter incident, stopped by while I was installing the fence. "Upholding your defenses?" he asked with a grin. Merely being diligent, I said, "Don't want any extra surprise. Car crashes on my property. He left, I've lived here for 15 years, and that woman made at least 10 of those years. Woeful what you did. Being tough enough to stand up to her didn't fix just your hedge problem. It fixed the whole neighborhood." I hadn't really considered it in those terms, but he was right for not caving and coming up with a creative and legal solution to protect my property. I had inadvertently fomented a revolution that improved life for everyone here. There was another twist in this saga that I have to share. 3 months ago, I received a thick envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a check for $2,500 and a handwritten note that simply stated, "For hedge repairs and your trouble, not everyone in her home approved of what she was doing." The check was from the husband of the previous president. It was written from his account, not their joint account, and clearly had been sent without her authority. I called the number on the check to thank him, and we had a surprise, refreshingly candid conversation. I attempted to get her to drop pestering you about that hedge, he said, but she became addicted to it, and once she has some idea in her mind, well, you had firsthand. I appreciate the offer, I said, but you don't need to clean up after her messes, believe me, he said with a sigh. I've been doing it for 30 years at least. This is the last one I'll have to deal with. It turned out they had divorced shortly after leaving there. The car accident, the public humiliation, and the cost had been the straw dying in what appeared to be a dysfunctional marriage. I found myself almost pitying him nearly. I used that money to have a professional-grade security system put in our home with high-def cameras that cover the whole property perimeter of our property, not because I'm insane that she'll come back for revenge someday, but because it makes me feel safe in the knowledge that if anyone ever makes the mistake of attempting to mess with my property again, I'll have crystal clear video. As for my hedge, it's going great. I even rooted some cuttings of the original bushes to use it. The whole length of our property line, each new section is planted in its own real enforced concrete planter, although I don't think they'll ever be called upon to serve their secondary use as car stoppers. Again, the lesson I learned from all this wasn't so much standing up to bullies or the use of security cameras. It was about community by not allowing one person's petty tyranny control my decisions. I discovered that the majority of my neighbors were with me. They were just waiting for someone to stand up. Our neighborhood is a different place. Now people socialize in the front yards, kids play together in the common areas, and the HOA board meetings are actually pleasant get-togethers with coffee and cookies instead of tension and threats. All because of a hedge, a concrete planter, and the refusal to step back from what was correct occasionally. That alone is enough to change things for the better. And yes, for those wondering, my wife still thinks the whole episode was absurd, but yesterday I caught her stroking one of the planter boxes lovingly as she passed it. Getting on with the concrete. I teased, she smiled, merely thanking it for providing us with the neighborhood we always desired. I couldn't have put it more coherently. Myself, the next one is named People Story. Hi, Honorable Judge Charlotte and Potato Queens and King's Editors note nickname for Charlotte Dober fans. I have come seeking your advice. I will accept my judgment. I marry in April. We got engaged at Christmas. But in January, my dad was told 5 months, max, after being removed from chemo for it not working. I will preface this by saying I never wanted the big white wedding. I don't prefer being center stage, etc. My best friend 26F of 14 plus years is the total opposite of me. My partner and I have been absolutely flat out busy with work. So I've let my parents plan the wedding. His parents are abroad on hollybobs, but have had input. My dad wanted a bigger party, as this will be the last chance he has to celebrate. I am obviously distraught and would love to give him just what he wants. I chose my bridesmaids, and my groom chose his best man. Groomsman, my best friend, is one of my bridesmaids, and my niece is my beastie. Since day one of being proposed has been looking for gowns. Not a problem, I've said all along. I just want them to be comfortable, so to wear what they like. I am paying for some of the dresses were in question, but I didn't feel I could tell her men's suits were all chosen and everyone was happy. A little side note here. My parents aren't too keen on my beastie. They think she's an attention seeker and a bit of a tart. They were happy with my choice because they know I love her to bits. Last week when we went to look at my beastie, she recently had a baby, so love visiting to see Bubba. She was saying, I think her partner, let's call him Paul, is going to propose at your wedding, and all getting excited. She kept saying how she wanted it to be the perfect proposal. And we have the perfect venue. That is true. The venue is gorgeous. On the way home from visiting her, I was talking to my partner and told him that I did not want him to get down on one knee on our wedding day because we were already going to have a wedding in my beautiful daddy and did not want to take away from that. I put my hand on his arm and tried to make this clear to Bestie. Her reply, if you're going to be a bridezilla, I don't want to be part of your rush wedding. If you can't stand other people getting attention, you're really pathetic and need to get over yourself here. I will input partner, and I have been together 4 years. Her and partner have been together 1 year. Not that this is any sort of competition, but here is where I may be the bridezilla. My response. I'm truly sorry. You feel like I've been a bridezilla. I've tried to be accommodating and as free-willed as possible. You've had your choice of dress shoes, hair, makeup, accessories, which were all paid for by me, and we have made it possible to bring your baby, which of course we would as we love you. You know, I don't enjoy being the center of attention, but this is my family, my friends, and they're coming to our wedding. If you're so desperate for the attention on you, maybe it's best you're not there. I'm sorry that this isn't working out. I'm really heartbroken, but today has to be perfect for my daddy. Her last text, I did not respond. Your dad's gonna die. He won't even be here to give a damn. I don't care about losing her over this, but I am consumed and now wondering if I was a bridezilla, help me potato kings, queens, and all the rest in between. Thank you to everyone that took comment, feedback, support, and advice. And as I am sure you all assumed we have news, he was going to leave her, not ask for marriage, so my partner and I got in touch with him, asked him to meet neutral ground. We chose park near his house. He agreed to meet us alone. Side note, we live around 2 hours away since I left my parents and we relocated to a new city. I commute most weekends to see my parents. I'd given him the messages from the screenshots I'd posted earlier, and he was fuming. Paul was angry with what had been said, then walked over to us and told me I had actually planned to leave her, but was holding off until after the wedding so as not to ruin the day for you and your dad. We had a major discussion. Paul and my partner have a great deal in, and he's always been lush to the two of us. We brought him home and drove the 2 hours home myself. I felt relieved. I've never been so stress-free. I didn't have anyone to try and please. And who needs an egg-sucking bridesmaid anyway? Paul phoned when we got back home. They've broken up. She tried to deny the messages but didn't delete them off her phone, so he knew it was true. He said he was repulsed and was going to leave after she'd been horrible to his mom as well. Paul is needing an amicable split up with baby, so we'll probably getting solicitors involved. My daddy's made up. He's heartbroken. I've lost, almost my best mate, but he's so glad she's gone. He's improving day by day, and we are doing the best we can. We took him shopping for a suit, and he looks just fantastic. My mom hasn't got her dress yet, but we are doing a girly day out, soon dresses spot, and just generally like major updates, 1 passwords with vendors. 2, Paul is coming either alone or with a friend or someone else. He needs a break. 3, Paul is going to inform her parents, who are hugely religious and hugely strict and will not stand for bullies. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow at Story Slices.